What's up, everybody? It's your boy Drew with High Fight IQ, and you are now watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with my boys Todd Adkins and Miguel Iterate. Miguel has been the matchmaker for over 200 shows worldwide and has worked with Hook and Shoot, Euphoria, Bodog, and ADCC. Make sure you subscribe to the Todd Atkins Show on YouTube. You can also find Miguel on his YouTube channel at MMA Collector 74. Don't forget to subscribe to High Fight IQ on all social media platforms, the House Call Sports on YouTube, the Fight Pit on YouTube. Now let's talk some fights, baby. Let's go.
So, yeah, I think it's the possibility exists that the UFC is writing Adesanya off. They painted him as the next John Jones earlier on, and I think he's let them down enough that maybe they're ready to move on. That's a very WWE thing. This is just speculation, but the WWE elevates and puts a guy down almost from week to week sometimes on their TV shows. So a guy's star rises and falls in wrestling a lot faster than UFC, but I think that they may be ready to move on from Adesanya.
As a person who grew up in Saudi Arabia, I kind of like to see them stick to their guns on some of that stuff, like the alcohol and stuff, because Saudi Arabia is different, and I live there, and I'd like to see it stay the one place that's a little bit different, even if they do some of this other stuff. They didn't do any of this stuff when I was growing up there. None of this. I couldn't even imagine them doing WWE, UFC, any of that.
Yeah, but even the golf and the other sports,
Mm-hmm.
tennis and things that they tend to attract. So no, they've come out of a shell. If you want to look at it from a Western perspective, and now we're getting into politics where we don't belong, probably.
I'm not. I'm just saying, as someone who grew up,
But I
I'd like
understand. I
keep
think
the
it's your
uniqueness
experience.
of it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting experience. I like in Abu Dhabi. I don't have that experience of being. It's like they were strict. Yeah, you heard the call to prayer 5 times a day,
Yeah.
and people stop to do that and that sort of stuff. But at the same time, you could go to a bar and get ripped. So there is that but where Saudi Arabia didn't have that but. So I think it taught a unique perspective on your part. So
Yeah.
I enjoy that. But but nobody wants to lose him as a sponsor, them as a sponsor. And I think that the UFC being a slight presence in PFL's world, the PFL should be more mad about that than, if John Jones happened to have gone there on his own and didn't tell the UFC, the PFL should probably still be more mad that he showed up and became a UFC presence there than the UFC would be like, oh, he's appearing on a PFL show.
Let me ask you this. Let's say you were Don Davis. Would you have let John Jones show up there?
That's an interesting question. Now, maybe.
For anybody watching this, Miguel's been behind shows. For those of you, I
No, you
assume
have to think.
most of you watching this probably know this, but Miguel's worked for a lot of shows. So I'm asking him, if you were in that position, what would you have done?
It's interesting because there are shows that like Bellator seem to be, and the PFL also is, where the structure is very limited. So the PFL really basically is a tournament now, and that's your show. And Bellator was tied to, like, maybe they're going to do a run of 3 shows and then they take some time off. So they work on the 3 shows and matchmaking, and then nobody's got a future calendar. If you have a real future plan, I would say the answer is yes. Because again, we may even drift over to talk about the lawsuit with the UFC and their class action from the fighters. With that looming ahead, in a few years, that could result. At this point, you just have to be pragmatic. It could result in a complete change of the landscape in MMA. One potential outcome of a trial, if it doesn't go the UFC's way, is that they're forced to change their business practices and that all their contracts become null and void. And there you have a whole world of free agents. And not treating John Jones disrespectfully 2 years ago at the PFL event in Saudi, where you thought you were big shit and John was just a guest, could affect you 2 years down the line if you're negotiating. So I would have let him in. I would have let him in based on the future, not based on what I could get out of him now. If I was thinking about getting of it now, I would be worried about anybody or anything to do with the UFC or even the WWE being at this show and being put in a position where, hey, they may know the sponsors. They may be sitting in the sponsors' private booths. Who knows? They didn't just come in. John Jones didn't just show up there and buy a ticket. Somebody paid for it.
Mhm.
Either the UFC did or the PFL maybe did because of the future negotiating, or one of the sponsors did because he wanted to hang out with John Jones and he likes it. So yeah, my long answer is yeah, I would have dealt with it head on that way, and I think they did a decent job putting him on the broadcast. For the way they controlled it, you said that they didn't really talk about John's future appearances or mention UFC. That they're talking about potential matches in Bellator and PFL. Then I think they mitigated the circumstances well. Like I said, the whole key to it is what impression is being given to the sponsors over there. Because I'll tell you a story from when I worked in Abu Dhabi. The show was a week away. The fighters were all arriving that same day at the show. And if you remember famously, they used to print out brackets. And the brackets came with stickers that you could advance and stuff. So this was a little bit of a chore to do with a week out, especially with fighters being replaced and this and that and the other stuff. So that fell to us to do, me and the crew that we brought over to give full credit. Rich Santoro, the old judo guy from Chicago, had a lot to do that. He was with us for a while at Hook and Shoot too, but he had a lot to do with that, and he also did babysitting duties on Bruce Buffer. So my hats off to Rich for that effort. But so we put together the brackets. That means we went to every fighter's room. We took a headshot of them. We got the correct spelling of their name. We found out their country and their flag, so that we could put it there, not make any mistakes and stuff like that. And a couple of days before the show, they come to us and they get the file to print out. So it's off and it's being printed. We show up at the day of the event and they're unloading the boxes with the programs. And I open it and it's not mine. It's something completely different. And I'm like, what the hell? And then another car shows up or another van shows up and unloads ours. The Sheik had two made and he picked the one he liked, which was mine.
Mhm.
Culturally, I think the similarities are the same. I think everybody over there is doing a put on our best face to try to impress the sponsors over there. That's the biggest pot of money in the world right now, especially on the sporting end. There's nobody who tosses it around for sports like that. The Chinese are building roads and things like that with their money, and this guy is blowing it on, Hulk Hogan. But none of these guys want to lose his attention, and that's the most important thing that's going on over there.
Yeah. Now, about the event, PFL almost got wiped out on the tournament part, except for the main event.
Hey,
So maybe talk about your impressions of that. Bellator kind of, I would say, outshined them in the head-to-head.
it just comes down to logistics. We all can pretty much acknowledge that most of the top 20 fighters in every weight class are in the UFC. Most of them. There are exceptions in some points and some guys that fight their way up the ladder the hard way and get stuck in there every once in a while. But the UFC and their longevity, and what they've built, they dominate. I fully suspected Bellator's roster would be deeper than the PFL's. Because at the end of the day, Bellator's been around more than a decade. And they've had some time to, if you look at it over the course of time, they had some very memorable matches, some very excellent competition, some unsung matches, some things that, the UFC allowed a real historical look at it. They put on some great stuff, I'm going to look it up here because, I mean, if you look at Bellator, um, Eddie Alvarez and Michael Chandler, and then the Ferrer brothers who've been there forever. And, those guys fought memorable fights. What about, what was the name of the wacky 135-pound wrestler, but he was a stud? He had,
135. Oh.
He called himself oh my gosh. He was an American wrestler, national team member, and got suspended from the national team for pot.
Oh, Joe Warren.
There you go, Joe Warren. Joe Warren put on very aesthetic, excellent fights. You know what I mean? He sort of was abrasive and annoying in his personality, maybe, and or whatever you want to say. But at the end of the day, there were, he put on great fights. So they've had good fighters. Ben Askren's run was there. You have Lima established himself at 170s. They had come up with several, and then they put on a lot of historic fights as well. I'm looking up a name here because he to me is one of their like unsung heroes at Bellator, and I'm gonna find his name. I'm confident of it. And he held, I think, the 205-pound championship for a long time, and actually fought like a series of very Emmanuel Newton. I don't know if you remember Emmanuel Newton.
Sure.
But I mean, those were actually some of the best fights I saw on Bellator's roster, from before or even after. That guy put his all in. So Bellator has a spot where they have some pedigree. And I thought that would show itself in a head-to-head, just more advanced fighters at a little bit of a different level. But the PFL, they're in charge now. So it's their job to do this. It's their job to mix it up. And now they're not Bellator fighters anymore. The other part of this is now that they did this Bellator, either you decide we've got two more cards that we could do with the current rosters, and we're going to do them as Bellator versus PFL 2, Bellator PFL 3. At some point, you got to sunset and get rid of the name Bellator. Can't have it anymore around. So they got to start thinking of that as well. But I think they did the right thing, and the Bellator fighters become PFL fighters, and then they get the rub. It didn't matter the way it goes. They should be able to work with it either way. If the PFL guys had run the roster, then yeah, maybe they could pay the Bellator guys less, or say, or whatever. It's all poppycock. They have to start merging the rosters,
And now a word from our sponsor, BetStamp Online Gambling. You can find my website that they have created for me at signupexpert.com/TAS, as in Todd Atkins Show. Again, that's signupexpert.com/TAS. Let me ask you about Claressa Shields. I mean, she competed on the card, and
how'd she do? I didn't see
she
this.
won, but she won a decision. But the thing is, that's a pretty big name, that you would think the UFC would have rather than PFL. What do you think about that?
I'm not quite sure about that.
Okay.
And the problem with Claressa is that she checks off a lot of boxes. The two-time Olympian is something that, that's what got Henry Cejudo his spot kind of high up, and she could come in at a very high level just based on that. On her boxing career as well, she could come in, as a world champion very quickly, very dominant, very athletic. As a world champion in boxing, she could do and come in on that credential as well. But she does have some negative drawbacks, I don't know if the fight was canceled or if it went through, but she had a training partner of hers knock out a 70-year-old trainer of an opponent during the weigh-ins.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some people that say, I'm not dealing with any baggage like that or potential baggage like that. And as a established athlete, she's going to come with an entourage and people, hangers around and stuff like that, that maybe she can't even control. I'm not blaming her, but yeah, if I were the UFC, I wouldn't have bought her in. And then she went and lost an MMA fight. In PFL with the $1 million, the UFL would look at her and say, yeah, what are you getting in boxing? You're not getting that much. You're not making $1 million here coming in out the door, in the door. So she went for the $1 million in the tournament, thought nobody could beat her, and in MMA is a different story. So she hurt herself that way. Then her entourage could be a potential red flag that no promotion wants to deal with. You don't want to deal with police interviewing people in the lobby of a hotel the day before a show. So, Claressa works, that way. She lessened her star, and she may still be demanding big money to come and do that. And the PFL doesn't have much, doesn't have many more assets like like the PFL is not like, well, we're spending all our money on Connor, who gets all the attention, so we can't pay you. They have nothing like that. Maybe Ngannou, right? Ngannou's getting all the attention, but if that's all the money they have, no, they're not paying anybody that much money, I don't think. So Clarissa may have gotten an extra bonus there or something.
I do think they have, if they're able to, like you said, drop the Bellator name and kind of shift everybody over to PFL. I mean, Bellator does have some guys that were on this card that I think, have some really good potential long term, like Johnny Eblin and Vadim Ninkov. Some of these guys they do have, AJ McKee,
Yeah.
Some guys who do have a lot of long term, I would say, upside. What do you
Yeah,
think
for
about
sure.
that?
Yeah, like I said, I would like to hear a number on how many fighters the PFL now has under contract. If any reporter can ask, if Don Davis comes out of his tower and actually does an interview, that would be a good question to ask him. Is how you always hear the UFC's got a roster, between 500 and 700 fighters. What is the PFL Bellator roster up now? Let's speculate and say it's 300 fighters. Then you need to be like, you're not going to keep all 300 happy or even a portion of them happy, forcing them into tournaments or not having an outlet for them. Your tournaments on TV, then you're going to do smaller shows with your bigger talent. Because usually it's going to be guys that haven't been through the grind or have been through the grind already. Are like, yeah, a tournament. I'm into one fight a day now. You know what I mean? So it's all in the follow up. It's kind of been a long term theme of us. With the UFC, they already at an early stage showed preparation. Like they had a calendar, they were working on it. It's like, okay, after this big thing, we hit with this big thing and this big, and they space things out, and you know, they already think of that in an advanced level. The PFL right now doesn't have enough shows, I don't think, to keep all 300 fighters happy. So they have to announce a whole new series, something different, or start shipping these fighters off to the European versions and things like that. And you know, then you're not developing European talent as much as you could, and you're also, taking on more travel, more travel budget when traveling those guys in the states to shows in the states. They have to show what the next step is, and quickly. It took them months since they signed Ngannou to figure out who the opponent was, and first they had to buy Bellator. And that gives you an interesting hint. I said September, right? Isn't that September when they signed Ngannou?
I don't know the exact month, but
I think it was September, October, that time frame.
mhm.
And so if the Bellator thing had actually been completed like a week after it became public, and they'd been able to do this show sometime in the June time frame, maybe, and then you signed Ngannou, you could have done Frere and Ngannou last September. They let a lot of time go by because you just don't have the activity going. So they did a good show. But I shudder to think that this is their best show, or that in the next 5 shows they've got to improve on this. They can't, go back to doing more regional stuff or things like that. They have to show some kind of plan, and that's my main lament.
Another guy who I think can really help them is Aaron Pico. This guy's won 9 of his last 10 fights, and that one loss was just where his shoulder popped out. They tried to put it back in, but they
Yeah,
just they had to call the fight. He
yeah,
he's on a roll, and
no,
I
no.
think he's a
Like
guy who could cross over a little bit.
sure, there's no doubt that on a case by case basis, Bellator hit with some of the guys. You can't say, uh, Pat Curran was a UFC fighter. No, Pat Curran had a great career, and he was a Bellator fighter.
Yeah,
The
I
same
just want to say
applies.
this. Bjorn Rebney, I think the roster was more stacked when he was there than it is now. He did an amazing job. He really did.
And they seem to do more shows under Bajorn too.
Yep.
And so he did seem to have a little bit more of a coherent plan. The yeah, Pat Curran, Michael Chandler, he's now with the UFC. But if things keep going the way they're going, his high point was with Bellator. You can't say that they haven't had and I said, go back and look at what was the kid's name, Emmanuel Newton. Go back and look at Emmanuel Newton's fights as champion and getting the championship. And you tell me that guy didn't fight with guts.
Yep.
Those were entertaining, terrific fights. So Bellator lacks the consistency. They don't have a product that they can put in front of the people every week. And, there are a lot of flat shows too, where you actually know nobody on the card and things like that. Especially, once you get to some of their Italy shows and things they tried to do some things, but none of it was part of a plan. They all seem to be one and done type of things.
I'm just saying, if PFL can play their cards right, they got a handful of guys that Bellator's given them that they could do something with.
Yeah, and mixed in with their guys, their guys are kings of the PFL. I always thought if I wanted to fill my championships in hook and shoot quickly. And, what about building up to a fight? It's like, okay, on the promotional line, you figure things out. But I think what's good for the promotion is to get the belt active and then bring in challengers that will consistently challenge your champion and improve if they beat you. So, for example, when Luke Pedigo lost his Pancrase style championship on our show, and much respect to Luke, but when Luke Pedigo, the older brother of Heath, lost his belt to hook and shoot, he lost it to Chris Lytle. So overall, as a matchmaker, I was like, well, my roster's improved. I have a better champion right now than I did before in terms of name recognition and ceiling and skill package. So as their champions lose, that's it. You have to acknowledge that you're getting better and that the roster's improving. That's the key. That's the key to the whole thing. And again, keeping all those guys happy. They have 8 champions in 8 weight classes. The PFL doesn't even have every weight class, right? So they're somewhere trapped in UFC la la land where they're bringing the weight classes along and stuff. It's like, no, now with Bellator, now you've got, what are you going to do? Cut every guy you don't have in a weight class that's active? What are they going to do? They shelve weight classes for years. For the first tournament, there may have been a certain weight class that wasn't in the second tournament, et cetera, et cetera. So they got a lot to figure out. And the best solution to it is get yourself on a television channel and have something produced that shows fights weekly.
Yeah, what I'm doing right now is kind of looking up the schedule for PFL because I know this is something that we always kind of hit on. So let's see what they're going to do next.
In the meanwhile, I'll talk about what's the guy's name who beat Bader? Frere, right? I forget his first name. Anyway.
I'll look it up here.
I guess that's kind of tragic and sad, but we should be knowing his name. But that's also a little bit of an indicator here that I think the PFL is doing what they have to do. But again, this could have come without the missteps of saying, hey, we're going to announce an opponent for Ngannou next week, and then not, disappearing for months and not saying anything.
It's a Renan Ferreira.
Renan, right? Yeah. Okay, and it's not, a situation where you say we're going to let him box once, and we're going to debut him in the PFL ring, and then he's all of a sudden boxing twice, and again, PFL silence, crickets. This was if they had been moving on their schedule, this match with Bader and this guy would Renan would have been done beforehand. Renan would have established himself. The idea is now he gets Bader's rub. He put out the guy that put out Fedor. Publicized. He's a giant of a guy. I saw you, and that it almost shows you that Bader. Remember, Bader in the UFC was a 205-pounder. So here's a situation where at heavyweight, he's never going to operate at 260. So he was trying to be a quick 230-pounder, and he ran into a younger guy. a younger, bigger, stronger guy that also has a lot more hunger to him because he really has not been on top even in Bell in rather in PFL too long, and he comes from a series of shows that are smaller and doesn't have a lot of fights. So I think like it should be interesting. He's 34, so maybe he's got a lot more fights that are not documented than 13-3. But yeah, he's also 6 years younger than Bader. So overall, it's an upgrade in champion. He's scary. He's mean on posters. He's going to look. Uh, uh, Another compliment is at least he's bigger than Ngannou. He's going to look apart against Ngannou in posters and pre-fight press conferences and things like that. He's going to provide an intimidating presence. So in that respect, I think they've got something they can work with. Probably better than Bader, who would have just looked small with Ngannou. And so it went okay. I like I said, I don't think the guy's got enough fights officially on the record to beat Ngannou. I think Ngannou has obviously been operating for a long time at the top of the game. Um, his prowess in boxing, as we've seen a little of already, kind of tells you that um, he's a pretty elite athlete. I'm not sure Ferrer is. He's a big guy, well trained, well conditioned, but naturally gifted athlete. I want to see more. That's all. It's just a question. I'm not putting him down, but we don't know. And some of those things should be answered by the time you're putting up a guy. If Ferreira beats him, then you really got nothing. Then you've actually overspent on Ngannou for yourself. You know.
I'm looking at the PFL website. So they have a fight coming up in PFL Europe with the Cedric Doumbé, the main event, but there's no other fights listed. This is on March 7th. And then they have a show in Ireland on March 22nd. This is a Bellator Challengers type series, I think it's called. And there's no fights listed. Bellator Champion Series is what it's called. 0 fights listed on the schedule.
Like I said, they have a long
on
way
the
to go.
website. It's like
they have a long way to go.
Yeah.
It just in the simplest form, especially with these shows where it's been public that fighters question, hey, I don't know when I'm fighting. That it would be reinforcing, Dave. Like you think you're fighting March 7th, which happens to be about a week from now.
Yeah.
If you think you're fighting March 7th in Ireland, you're sitting there and it's like the FedEx with your plane tickets hasn't come yet, or whatever the process is, you're not sure. It would be very reaffirming to be able to go to your company's website and at least see that they're advertising and moving the match forward.
Right.
If you've signed the contract, there's no reason for you to not be going there. And if you don't have contract signed for a show in a week, then you got a long way to go.
Yeah, it's like they have a write up, but there's no like card.
Yeah, the more you look at it, the more they have to make leap years of progress very quickly if they're even going to get onto the level of the next, jump to the next level and not be just, a crappy show.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're a fan, let's say you want to tune in. Okay, I want to see what PFL's next event is. It's going to be in Paris, March 7th, but there's no card except for the main event.
And then March 22nd in Ireland, right?
Yeah, and there's no fights whatsoever on that one. So I mean, you're right. It's like that part of the stuff. UFC would have that all up already.
Yeah, they would already be decided with a couple of fights, maybe that they announce later at the top or at the bottom of the card, depending on what the thing is. But once the fight's signed and you've got it on contract, why would you tell the website guys don't put it on the site? Or why wouldn't you go to them and go, hey, this isn't on the site yet. Make sure this goes there. CC the web guys on the internal fight list when the fights are the contracts are signed. There's no reason to not be promoting them. But maybe, like I said, if they haven't signed the contracts and they're a week out, then they're further behind than you would think.
And now a word from our sponsor, Live to Fight Design Banners.
Live to Fight Design is a fighter and gym banner company in Iowa that is owned by Sean Clemens. If you're a fighter or a gym owner that is interested in ordering a banner, you can reach Sean Clemens on Instagram at Live to Fight Design. If you use Todd's promo code Todd Atkins, you will get $20 off of your order.
I don't know if you want to talk about the latest, thing with the mediation with the UFC trial. I mean, I talked to Bob. He said it was just court ordered. It's nothing that the two sides met and decided to do. This kind of thing happens in trials like this, where the court kind of orders mediation to see if they can get that kind of over
Okay.
with. And he said nothing, he's just like, hey, your guess is as good as mine. Nothing may even come of this.
Yeah. So here's the situation. As far as I understand this, they're going to court here in the beginning of April. So the judges come in with a decision that says, look, we got till the beginning of April. You guys set up with a mediator who's basically a judge, like a junior judge, or not even a judge, but he's a mediator. That's his job. So, but he's doing the same job as a judge, but not really. He's mediating between the two parties as they try to come to an agreement so they don't have to go to court and fight. So the UFC walks in that room and goes, hey, here's $5 billion in cash. And then the next response would be something along the lines of, okay, that's a decent financial settlement. We'd like, 7, whatever you want to say, just for negotiations, but we'll give you 5, but you got to change your business practices. That's going to be the key. If the UFC throws enough money on that the fighters and the lawyers say, we spent enough, the time is right, we're unlikely to get a better settlement, and we'll get some money out of it here. We'll save the court time, and they walk home with their 5 million. The UFC keeps doing what they're doing. So it is very interesting, and we don't know what'll happen. And the fact that, in an interview, the fighters and the lawyers will all tell you that, business practices is practically a showstopper with them. Like, they need the UFC to change their business practices, or else they're going to be in this boat. All the fighters are going to be in this boat and forever, and also all the fighters are, going to remain underpaid.
Yeah, and Bob was
So,
telling me usually both these cases would probably be settled at the same time. They wouldn't settle the first one and then go to court on the second one. The first one, business practices off the table. Second one, they're on. So I was asking, basically, this would be a settle for both, not just one.
okay. And that's,
In all likelihood.
for the lawyers to decide, how they work their benefits of that. I'm sure both companies can, the UFC would like to get both lawsuits out of their way as soon as possible, probably. And, the other guys, if one lawsuit fails and the other one is stronger, like you said, with some of the business practices or whatever, also being involved, then, it may benefit them to split them up. So I don't know enough of the politics going on, but
Right.
it is jockeying for position at this point. This is what the lawyers actually get paid for. That's the sad part of all this. And I like Bob Mazy. I think he gave us a great interview, gave us a good time, was very down to earth and insightful. But at the end of the day, something's gone wrong when it's the lawyers and all this process that are getting a bunch of money devoted to them, and the fighters are still, at times entering these shows making $10,000.
Well, they're trying to change that. I mean,
Right.
it's
But
taken a long time.
but we'll see if in mediation they say, yeah, well, we just change it for 1,100 of us, and they take a money settlement without anything else. Then we are still then, the PFL's my speculative gamble that the PFL is making, which thinks that this lawsuit could result in a change of business atmosphere for them, and they're going to wait it out for a little while before assaulting the American market. I noticed in your calendar that they had no shows in the United States announced, right?
I think they have one in April. Let me take a
Fantastic. So 2 months away. Let's see if they have a card or a main event. So they were in Saudi, they're going to Europe, and now they're coming to America, on their fourth stop in 1990, in the fourth stop in the fourth month of 2024.
Yeah,
So
they have
in
3
other
events
words,
in April for their, like, their
tournament
heavyweights,
openings.
women's
Yeah.
flyweight tournament, then light heavyweights, lightweights, and then the last one would be welterweights, featherweights. So they have
So
like
no
3
middleweights, huh?
tournament type shows.
So no middleweights, huh? What are the middleweights doing? What's every middleweight on this roster thinking?
Hmm.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
There's uh, a big picture that you've got to be managing like a boss as a matchmaker. And I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I didn't have a lot of unhappy guys, and a lot of people didn't. They knew, they had a 4-fight deal. It was outlined, and they got their fights. Um,
And when I went to event details for April, the first one, no
yeah.
fights, 0
No,
fights,
so yeah,
0.
we have no idea what's going on there. Meanwhile, if you look at the UFC, I'm sure they have fights announced for
Yeah, months.
their April cards. They probably so here's PFL rolling out in the US, and they do 3 shows in April. Hopefully in May maybe in June, and they take all of May off, and in June they come back with the next round of tournament. And then some type of good show for the finals sometime in June, July. How many shows is the UFC going to do between now and then?
Yeah,
It's
let's look at
it's
the
it's
UFC's
not even
website in comparison.
it's not even comparable. It's something that, without thinking, they're taking steps back in the eyes of the public, and also possibly, like I said, very important in the eyes of the roster. You have 300 human resources cases now. If they say they have 300 contracts, 300 human resources cases, with every one of those fighters having a life of their own and problems of their own and stuff like that. And you have to have somebody who kind of understands which guys you want to take care of, which guys you can't, which guys you can hand. You got to know everybody. You can't let people go through the radar. Or, disgruntled fighters, you don't want that, because they're getting paid what it says on the contract. But if they're not happy going into the fight, I think a good example of that is Cerrone versus McGregor. I think Cerrone's a huge pro, and I don't think he tried to show it, but I thought he let on when he said, he kind of, public was saying, "Oh, you're getting the Conor McGregor payday. You're getting the Conor McGregor payday," and he kind of called him short and said, "I got a contract. I don't see any extra money coming my way, immediately, or anything like that." He wasn't impressed with you. He said it was just one of his deals. Maybe he wasn't that happy heading into that fight, and therefore you got a weak performance. You have one of the few in his career, right? So you got to consider everything. If you're in the fight game, keeping the fighters happy within a certain parameters. You can't give them all $1 billion, right? But keeping the fighters happy within a certain parameter, making them feel part of a plan, is very key to managing a bigger roster.
Yeah, when you look at the UFC in comparison, they have 7 events over the next 3 months. I'm sorry, 7 events over the next 2, March and April. They have cards for every one of them on their website, all of them, full.
Yeah.
The PFL doesn't have fights.
Yeah, they announce shows, not fights.
For their next
So
event, even they don't have.
that's a huge problem too. And here's the thing: is maybe the only justifiable reason for not doing that is also sad. But that is that they don't have enough material. So in other words, if I've got 8 fights already programmed for next week, and 6 of them are, 8 fights, 16 fighters, 10 of them are European guys because we're over there, or 12 of them are European guys because we're over there, and I have to go with a web page, and I don't have pictures for 6 of them. It sounds stupid, but you would look terrible if, hey, look, guy in the co-main event, they don't have a picture for, because the UFC doesn't allow for any of that. They make sure they go get the pictures. They make sure they have that. It may even be part of the contract. It's like, hey, you gotta go sit in a studio and do a picture portfolio for us right now. If you're a Bellator PFL fighter, if they're going to be on a bigger level, yeah, that may be why it's not, because they don't even have pictures of some of the guys. As lame as that sounds, that's a problem we ran into as a smaller show, and that's what behind the scenes they operate like still.
Yeah, for PFL though, it's a bad look, because they're
Yeah,
saying, "Oh, we're the rising number 2." Yeah, you have a show in a week. You don't even have any fights up for it besides the main event.
yeah.
You know.
Like I said, they unwillingly, in the eyes of the fans who are very fickle, every time they go to the site, and let's say they're not as critical as me or you, right? But every time they go to the site and they don't see any fights, what do you think they do? Sit around and read it, all the banners? No, they leave.
Yeah.
And you're not even maintaining eyes on your product like the UFC. The UFC eyes is everywhere. So there's always eyes on their product. And the PFL goes away for months.
Yeah, if I was planning to buy a ticket, I could go and look at the UFC's next event and look at every single fight and know, okay, this is the card I'm getting. They have an event next week, and besides the main event, you have no idea who's
What's the
fighting.
UFC got running against it?
Oh, you want me to see if they have one running against it?
Yeah.
April. They don't have anything running against the April 19th card.
Okay. What about the March shows? I know they're in Europe and the time is stunted. Does Bellator run on Friday and then, PFL run on Friday and then the UFC Saturday? Did they seed Saturday already?
The next card that I'm sorry, so the next card that PFL had was the March 7th card. I'm sorry. They don't have
Is
anything
March
going
7th
against
a
that. So
Friday or Saturday?
it's a Thursday.
A Thursday. Okay,
Yeah. March
fascinating.
9th is Saturday.
Okay, good.
UFC has
So
O'Malley
obviously
Vera on March 9th.
okay. So they're avoiding going head to head with that, which is probably a good move for them because even if the UFC is demanding a pay per view for theirs, they'll probably get more eyes on their show than Bellator or
Mhm,
PFL. I'm calling them Bellator just out of habit here, but I mean PFL.
mhm. Yeah. They still have a long way to go. I think that's just the easiest way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. They're like I said, they took a step, but it's like a baby learning to walk. They took a step and they fell again. We kind of got to get up to speed here to the point where we're moving forward with some consistency and some agility, some attempt to get to a higher level. They seem content with the tournament format, and they seem to be kind of resting on their Bellator laurels. They did, like I said, they did a decent show here. Took them long enough to announce the thing. I predicted, they're months behind where they could be, and they don't seem to be trying to make up that time either. They move at a pace that is not enticing to fans.
Yeah, I think it would be impressive if they had like their next 4 or 5 cards laid out. We're running like an oiled machine here now. You
Yeah,
know.
something.
Yeah. I want to ask you this. I mean, you're a big boxing guy, so we see that Ryan Garcia versus Devin Haney's been announced. They had a press conference there in Vegas or in New York. I think it was actually not Vegas. Um, what do you think about that?
And what weight?
I don't know what the weight's going to be. I can look it up.
Yeah, it'll do well. While I talk, look. Shouldn't Haney fight Gervonta?
Gervonta Davis.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we never get the fights we want. He just got off a house arrest, so it's not like he's had a lot of time to
okay.
train.
Here's the thing: is it does feel a little bit like I respect Garcia for taking the fight because in boxing, certainly looking at going 0-2 is not good for the career. So he's definitely kind of putting it on the line, taking a risk, kind of thing. Haney gives you less of that appearance here. He's taking a guy who we've already seen beaten, so now he'll beat him. He won't even get that huge a rub if he wins, and if he loses, yeah, he has done some damage, but I don't think he's think his confidence is that he'll think he's the favorite and is going to win this fight. So we'll see. It's a good fight. It's a good fight. I'm eager to see Ryan again against a top of top of the list kind of guy because um at the end of the day, Gervonta was pretty elegant in taking him out. After all the internet hype, and they did a good job building up that fight. Gervonta knocked him out. Wasn't even that active the whole fight. Just kind of took it chill, and then dropped him twice and ended the fight with basically Ryan Garcia's signature punch. So I think what he did was pretty elegant.
It's gonna be super lightweight, which is Haney's weight.
Okay, 140.
Yeah.
So Garcia's coming up. Yeah, hey, we'll see how he handles. Maybe the suck to 135 was tough on him already. So at 140, he maybe he should retain power. He's thinking about all those things. Like I said, I don't think he's going to go out easy with Devin Haney, but that's just one strike against him. He's never fought a 140 pounder before.
Now, as always, before we end the show, I like to let you kind of update people on what you're doing with the dog rescue.
Well, this week has been fun. It wasn't at the dog rescue, but my neighbor, who has two relatively big older dogs, one of them got pounded by a porcupine. So I do live out in the boondocks, and we're pulling quills out of his nose and chest for a little bit yesterday, and he broke his foot somewhere in the altercation, or somewhere on the overnight. He came in overnight banged up. So after I get off of here, I'm going to go to the vet with the neighbor's dog, and we'll see how he does.
Yeah. And for anyone who wants to contribute, we always put in the show notes where you can contribute this dog rescue. And, we always appreciate anyone who can help out there. And
Sure, yeah, it's a long-term thing. Like I said, the situation for dogs is tough all over the world, just like it is for people. But if you're so inclined to help, dogs are definitely grateful recipients of your help. So more so than humans at times. So just something to consider for you people out there.
right. And for everybody who's watch the show, we always appreciate it. And feel free to comment on there. And Miguel likes to come in there and answer questions. I'll come in there and answer stuff. We always try to check on it, and subscribe to the channel, like the videos, and as always, we appreciate your support. Until next time, look out for the next episode. Take care.
Cool.